There are a handful of things that new leaders do that feel like good leadership in the moment. They feel responsible, they feel strong, they feel like being the person in charge. But feeling like a good leader and actually being a really strong one aren't the same thing. But the good news is it only takes a few simple mindset changes to go from being a decent leader that people like to being a really strong leader that people respect. Welcome to the Honest Leadership Series, where we talk about how to become better, more honest leaders in a world that's filled with the opposite. My promise is to give you simple actions that you can take, not just some theory to admire from a distance. If that sounds good to you, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe. And if this episode helps you in any way, please leave a like before you go. I have spent most of my career leading teams inside of one of the largest corporations in the world. And one of the things that I love to do the most is to talk with other leaders to form a community of being able to learn with each other, share our struggles, share our frustrations, and learn how to overcome them together. That's the community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. And it would mean the world to me if you would be a part of that. Okay, so I promised you some simple mindset changes that will make you a stronger leader. So let's go ahead and get into those. Number one, sometimes leaders get stuck in this trap of feeling like their value comes from their technical competence. And that kind of makes sense. You probably got promoted because you were good at your job. So when you become a leader, those leadership competencies feel a little bit more ambiguous, very unfamiliar. So it's natural to fall back on what really feels solid, which is solving problems yourself, being that one with all the answers. But here's the problem with that. The more you lean on being the answer, the less you're actually leading. The more you're just doing your old job, but with a bigger title now. So think about what that costs you. You can't take a real day off because your phone doesn't stop even when you want to. You can't get promoted, maybe, because nobody above you believes the team survives a week without you being in the room. And the people on your team, the ones that you're supposed to be developing, stop trying to solve things on their own. Because why would they when it's faster just to ask you and you'll swoop in and fix the problem, solve the issue, whatever it might be. It also shows up in smaller ways too. Think about how much context lives just inside your head. The reasoning behind a decision, the history of why something is the way it is. None of that gets written down or handed off, probably not because you're trying to hide it on purpose, but maybe it's because as long as you're the only one who knows the why, then there's a feeling that you just stay essential. And underneath all of that is a harder realization. If you're not the one solving the problems, putting out the fire, then who are you? For a lot of leaders, being useful and being a strong leader have started to feel like the same thing. Getting pulled into everything feels like proof of your worth. But being asked to help isn't the same thing as being valued as a leader. Being valued is what happens when the thing that you built, that team that you built, keeps working, whether you're standing in the room or not. Think about the last time your team solved a real problem without you. If you're struggling to remember one of those, or maybe it's just been a while, that might be the clearest sign of all that the mindset needs to change. I remember there was this guy that I sat across from in a leadership class once, and he was talking about his team. He wasn't exactly bragging, but he was genuinely proud when something hard came up that his team had no choice but to call him in. And I remember him just lighting up talking about it. His team called him the heavy, which just meant when something hard came up, something difficult and complex, they had to call in the heavy, is how he described it. Now, I saw him again about 6 months later, and he wasn't leading that team anymore. He had been moved into some other individual contributor role or some type of SME role. Now, I don't know the full story of why or what happened, and I want to be honest about that. I'm not pretending to know exactly why he was moved. But here's what stuck with me. He was proud of being the guy with all the answers, but not proud of building a team that didn't need him for it. And in the end, he was replaced. Perhaps it wasn't for the right reasons. So how do we actually build a team that doesn't need us? Well, I think you can start with one decision this week and share the reasoning behind it, not just the instruction, but the real why, not just the what. That is the antidote for this information hoarding that we already talked about. The more of your own reasoning that you put out in the open, the less essential your physical presence becomes, and the more essential your judgment becomes, which is, to be honest, a much, much better trade. But the real change happens in the moment when someone brings you a problem. And your instinct, if you're struggling with this, is going to be to solve it because you can and because it's faster. But try this mindset change instead. Just because you can fix it doesn't mean that you should. The question isn't, can I solve this? But it's, whose job is it to learn how to solve this? And most of the time, that answer isn't going to be you anymore. So the next time someone brings you something, resist that urge to try and fix it. Ask them what they'd try first, and then share your thoughts or maybe any pitfalls that you see coming. You can still coach them, but let them take it from there. And if that question that we talked about earlier is still nagging you, the one about, who are you really if you're not the one solving all the problems and putting out all the fires? Well, imagine if you're the person instead who built the team that didn't need saving in the first place. That's a harder thing to be proud of because nobody claps for it in the moment, but it's the only version of leadership that really matters because the goal was never to be needed. The goal is to build something strong enough that it doesn't need you, and you can be proud of that instead. Does any of this sound like you? Do you feel like you're getting pulled into everything, like nothing actually gets done unless you're the one doing it? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts on all of these. Let's get into number 2. Corporate structure loves to talk about urgency. Move fast, get it done, have that sense of urgency. And there's truth in that. Nobody's arguing for slow and sloppy, but here's where it goes wrong. Urgency turns into emergency far too often. And when everything is treated like priority number 1, then nothing actually is. Your team stops being able to tell the difference between what genuinely can't wait and what just feels that way because maybe you're anxious about it as the leader. And that's exhausting to live under, and it burns people out really, really fast. Real productivity isn't just speed. It's giving your people enough room to actually think through and make good decisions. And an emergency mindset doesn't leave room for that. It just leaves room for reacting to every problem. I once worked for a leader who put it really simply. He said what he wanted was for everything to get done on time, but with no heroics. And that stuck with me. You want urgency, but what you don't want is a team of people constantly playing hero to save something at the last minute. Because if heroics are normal, then something way upstream is very, very broken. Now, picture the opposite. Imagine your team where priorities actually get set, communicated really clearly, and people know their jobs and they know when things are due, and they work accordingly. Nobody's confused about what matters most this week. And built into that schedule is some real float, room for things to go wrong because they will. Something always comes up, right? But because there's float, it doesn't send the whole team into panic mode. It just kind of gets absorbed. Each individual milestone still matters. Each one is genuinely urgent. Hit this date, deliver this piece of work. But because those milestones are spaced out with room to breathe, the overall goal never becomes an emergency. People are just working steadily down the list, one milestone at a time. Think about what that would actually feel like, not just for you as a leader, but for the people underneath you. Showing up to work without this low-grade dread that today's the day that everything just falls apart. So what does this look like in practice? Well, here's what I'd recommend. Start each day in the morning with an escalation meeting. And I want to be really clear about this. This is not another status meeting. Nobody wants to sit down and hear the same update regurgitated for the 10th time while everyone else just kind of checks out. The goal of this meeting is kind of different. Each person tells you what has to happen that day or that week and what they need from you or from someone else on the team to actually get it done. What's in their way? What are the obstacles? And then once you've heard that from everyone, you get to set the priorities. This matters most, this is secondary, and maybe the third thing goes on the back burner because there's never enough time for everything, right? Doing this daily gives you two things. First, it's an avenue for accountability. You know immediately if something that was supposed to get done yesterday didn't. And then secondly, and just as important, it gives you a built-in moment to actually shift priorities in real time, instead of finding out a couple weeks later that everything's suddenly an emergency again. The goal is not zero urgency, right? Urgency has its place, but a team that gets things done on time without anyone having to play the hero to save it at the very last minute, that's not a lower bar. That's actually a harder version, but it's the better version of leadership. Does this ever happen to you on your team where everything is treated like an emergency until nobody can actually tell the difference between what is truly urgent and what is just a dive and catch? Tell me more about this in the comments too. So let's move on to the third one. Getting the title doesn't get you real authority. It gets you an org chart position, the ability to assign tasks, the box that says who reports to you. But what it doesn't get you is a team that actually wants to follow you. That part you still have to earn, starting on day one with everybody watching you. A title gets you compliance. People will do what you ask because they have to, because it's their job. But compliance is the floor. It's not the ceiling. Real authority gets people to commit, people doing their best work because they trust you, not because they're required to listen. So if the title doesn't do it, what actually does? Well, it's built on a handful of specific behaviors. One is leading by example, which means actually doing the things that you're asking of others. Second, it's communicating with real clarity, which doesn't mean being loud. It doesn't mean being forceful. It just means people always know exactly where they stand with you and what to do next. And then third, it's holding people accountable, including yourself, especially yourself. That last one matters more than people think. There's an old saying that what you permit, you promote. If you let something slide because it's easier in the moment, you're not really being kind. You're telling your whole team that the standard is negotiable. And once people learn that the standard is negotiable, it applies to everything, not just one thing that you let go on one instance. Here's a tell that you're leaning on the title instead of your behaviors. Listen to yourself the next time you're asking for something. If it starts with as your manager or because I said so even, that's not authority talking. Nobody who actually earned authority needs to say that out loud. Here's where this gets tricky though, because it's not always the obvious leaders who struggle with this. Sometimes it's the leaders who people genuinely like, but you can still lose authority even then, especially if you let those small things slip, like we talked about before. Picture this. Something's due on Friday, and then Friday comes and goes, and it doesn't get done. You notice, but you like the person, you like this employee, and they're a good employee, and it feels easier, kinder even, to just let it ride a few more days. And so you do. In that moment, it feels like flexibility, but it's actually the opposite. The moment you let a deadline slide without a word said, you've quietly moved the deadline without them knowing it and without you saying it out loud. And your team is going to learn that really fast, not because you said it out loud, but because you showed them. Now Friday doesn't really mean Friday anymore. It kind of means Friday-ish, unless someone reminds you about it. And that's the trap. It's not that you can never give margin. Sometimes there's a real reason that a deadline needs to move. But there's a difference between granting margin on purpose and then just letting things slip because confrontation feels uncomfortable. One is a decision, but the other is just erosion of your own authority. Every time you let something slide, you don't just lose a little bit of authority. You take on a little bit more work yourself. Now you're the one keeping track of what's late, chasing it down, reminding people of what they already agreed to. Instead of your team holding themselves to a deadline, you're now having to hold them to every deadline. That's not flexibility. That's you doing everyone else's job of managing their own commitments. So how do you actually earn this instead of just having it granted to you on paper? Well, start by noticing your own language. Every time you catch yourself about to say, as your manager, or because I said so, stop. and replace it with the actual reason behind the ask. People don't need to be reminded who's in charge. They know that. What they need to understand is why the thing matters. Second, audit your own follow-through and be honest about it. Do you do what you say you're going to do on the timeline that you said you're going to do it? That's not a small thing. That's the entire foundation of how authority is earned. It's one kept commitment at a time. Hold the line when things start to slip. When a deadline passes, say something the same day, not a week later once it's already a pattern. That's not being harsh. That just keeps Friday meaning Friday. And apply the same standard to your own commitments. If you told your team that you'd get them an answer by a certain day, treat that the same way you'd want them to treat their commitments. And then watch for excuse-making habits that lead to all of this in the first place. It's tempting to make excuses on your team's behalf. You know they're really busy. They're doing their best maybe, and you kind of say to yourself, they'll get to it. But every time you make that excuse for them, you're the one who ends up picking up the slack and chasing down those updates and doing the follow-up work that they didn't do. That should frustrate you a little bit. And that frustration is healthy. That frustration is useful, and it's the energy that you need to go have that accountability conversation instead of just absorbing their job into yours. Leading by example, communicating with real clarity, and holding the line, including when it's uncomfortable. If you do those three things consistently, things will change. People stop following you because your title says they have to. They start following you because your behavior earned it. Which of these do you find the most important in your workplace? Or do you find the most challenging? And then what other behaviors do you think are the most important to maintaining that authority as a leader? Being replaceable instead of being needed, and then treating urgency like a tool instead of a fire alarm, and then earning authority instead of assuming it, those things don't change overnight. But every one of them starts with a single decision this week. Make that decision today, and you've already started leading differently than you were an hour ago. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I sincerely hope that this has helped you, and if it did, please leave a like before you go or subscribe for more content just like this one. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.